What happens when a tax is placed directly on sellers? In this video, we'll examine how this type of tax changes the market dynamics. We'll model how the tax affects the equilibrium quantity, the price buyers pay, and the price sellers receive. You'll see why the tax reduces the quantity sold and how the burden is shared between both buyers and sellers, even though that tax is only imposed on the sellers. By the end, you'll understand the ripple effects of seller-side taxes on our market outcomes.
Right, as a reminder, we're still going to use the example of Philadelphia imposing a 30-cent tax per unit tax on every unit of soda sold. And so what we're going to do now is have the law place that tax on the sellers instead of the buyers. Right. This, again, is the legislative incidence. The legislative incidence tells us which side of the market, buyers or sellers, will have to pay that tax, write that check to the government. And so I want to think about why we're going to shift the supply curve with this to model our tax effects. And here I want to just give you a thought experiment to help you understand why we're doing that. So I want you to think about if you suppose that the supplier's marginal cost of producing a soda is $1.10, right? This means that they are willing to sell that marginal soda for at minimum $1.10. So they have to get a price from the buyer of at least $1.10 that they get to keep to convince them to actually sell that soda. If they don't get $1.10, then the price or the revenue is less than their marginal cost of production. That's bad for profits, and the rational rule would say they shouldn't do that, right? So they need to get at least $1.10 to keep as the seller to convince them to sell that soda at minimum. Okay, so now we're going to impose the tax. So now how much do you think the seller is willing to sell the soda for after a 30-cent tax is applied to it, right? So think about what the tax does to the overall cost of selling that soda. Does it make them go up or down, right? So I want to pause here, and I want you to pause here, and I want you to think about what would be the price, minimum price that they'd be willing to sell it for after that tax. Great. So now that you have this number in your head that you think you'd be willing to sell this soda for, the answer is going to be $1.40. Okay. So we need to get the marginal cost of production is $1.10 right here. This is going to be like paying for the workers, paying for the water, paying for the sugar, the packaging, the shipping, all that stuff. But now they also have to pay a 30-cent check to the government for every single unit sold. And so that's basically just increasing their costs of production, right? All these other costs they had before, and other costs go up by 30 cents per unit. They don't care, the seller, they don't care whether they have to pay those costs to workers or they have to pay those costs to government. It's all just costs to them. And so now after the tax, they would be willing to sell that soda only if they got $1.40 from the buyer, right? Because they have to cover the private costs and then also that tax, okay? And so we're essentially going to shift up that supply curve by the amount of the tax here. And you can see that here. We've shifted up that $1.10 to the $1.40, the amount of that tax. All right. Now we're going to model the effects of our tax on a seller. So we have price over here. We have quantity in terms of millions of bottles of soda on that axis. Demand curve and our supply curve. Great. Pre-tax, the no tax equilibrium will just be supply crosses demand, and that'll give us a quantity of 1.4 million and a equilibrium price of $1.10. All right. So now think back to that thought experiment. We're going to impose a tax of 30 cents. And so now the minimum that you'd willing to sell, it used to be $1.10 for that marginal soda there, that 1.4 million. Well, now the seller is going to be having to have at least $1.10 plus 30 cents. So that right there is going to be $1.40. All right, shifted up by the amount of the tax. That vertical distance equals 30 cents. And so imagine we did that for every single unit. We've shifted up by 30 cents, that minimum willingness to sell. Let me get this a parallel line, because we're shifting everything up by the same amount. And so this will be our supply after tax. Great. Next step, we need to find our tax equilibrium. And so that will be our original demand curve and our new supply after tax. This will be our after tax equilibrium. And once we find that, we'll get our quantity. So take that equilibrium, take it down to the quantity axis, and this will be our quantity tax. That's 1.2 million. So I'm just making up these numbers, but what you can get is that's definitely that quantity tax. And this one here is going to be quantity no tax. So we already have one result. If we impose a tax on soda, again, we will get quantity goes down because of that tax. You get less of it, and that's the whole point of this type of tax. Philadelphia wants to get people to consume less soda, sugary drinks, and that this tax will do it. You make it more expensive, people will consume less. Okay, now we want to get what's going to happen with prices. We will take our quantity tax, take that 1.2 million up to your original demand curve, that blue curve there, right? If you on the demand curve, that has to do with buyers, and buyers are going to be this is going to give us the price that buyers are going to pay. So we can take this line over there, and that's going to be $1.30. And this will be price buyers pay. Now we're going to get the price sellers get to keep. We need to read that off the original supply curve. So here's our original supply curve. Take our 1.2 million quantity up to the original supply curve. Let's put a dot. Right. Come on over. Right. And that's going to be, let's say it's going to be $1. And this will be price sellers keep. Okay. All right, so why are these different, these two prices? Well, it has to do with the amount of the tax. So notice that this difference here between the price buyers pay and the price sellers receive is 30 cents. That's the amount of the tax. And so what we would do if the tax is legislated on sellers, the legislative incidence, the posted price would be $1.30. So this is like if you go into Kroger, you go look on the price on the actual bottle of soda, that price would be $1.30. All right, and then Kroger has to write a check of 30 cents to the government, so they're losing 30 cents, and so Kroger only gets to keep $1. Okay, and that's how you can interpret these two numbers. All right, so in terms of our effects, then we now have price buyer pays increases. It increases from that $1.10 now to $1.30 after tax, and price seller receives goes down. It was $1.10 and now it went down to $1. So we can already see that both sides are going to be affected by this tax, made worse off. Buyers pay higher prices, sellers get to keep lower prices, even though the law says that sellers have to pay it.